In June 1347, Genoese merchant ships, filled with goods and refugees fleeing a local epidemic brought by the Mongols from the east, set sail from Crimea toward Constantinople. Along this route, a previously unseen deadly disease entered medieval Europe, what we now call the plague, and what people in the Middle Ages named the Great Mortality. The plague pandemic of 1347-1353 was the deadliest infectious catastrophe in human history, plunging medieval metropolises, towns and villages into a reality reminiscent of today's post-apocalyptic films. In this video, I will describe how a major European city lived when it was overtaken by a brutal and devastating disease, relying on the testimonies of medieval chroniclers. My name is Stas Demenchuk. Don't forget to subscribe and give this video a thumbs up. By January 1348, in Florence, as in many other corners of Europe, people knew well about the horrifying devastation of Constantinople by an unknown pestilence brought by Genoese ships from Crimea. During that ill-fated summer of 1347, the apocalyptic disease carried by merchant vessels headed for Genoa ravaged the islands of Sicily, Sardinia and Corsica, and eventually by early autumn reached Genoa itself. In winter, the progress of the pestilence halted, and the inhabitants of the Italian city-states could only speculate whether the disease could truly wipe out nearly the entire population of a city, or if these were simply exaggerated rumors and tales. The Great Mortality, as this new unknown illness was called at the time, became the central topic of Christmas feast in Florence, the capital of the Florentine Republic, one of the wealthiest medieval cities, an economic and cultural center with a population exceeding 100,000. The discussion of these rumors did not bypass the Christmas table of our main character, through whose composite image we will experience the arrival of the plague, or as they called it then, the Grey Death, in one of the medieval megacities. This is Giovanni di Cambio, a Florentine merchant, council of dyers and foreign clothes traders guild. He owns 2 trading companies, has political ambitions, and dreams of being elected a priori of the Signoria, the highest governing body of the Florentine Republic. He has an extensive network of business connections and friends among wealthy merchants and politicians. Giovanni lives in an estate with his wife Filippa, daughters Beatrice, Lucrezia and Isabella, his son Matteo, and about a dozen servants. Giovanni spends most of his working hours in the guild's residence or in the Signoria's residence, the luxurious Palazzo Vecchio. On Wednesdays, he visits the bathhouse with friends and fellow merchants, and on Saturdays with his family. In the warm season, he and his wife and children often stay at a villa outside the city belonging to his best friend, one of the 8 priori, Pietro Appiano. During the Christmas holidays, the guilds went on a week-long break. After the festivities, in the corridors of the Signoria, Giovanni overheard conversation among other consuls who exchanged extremely alarming rumors about events in the world. It was said that somewhere in Anatolia, countless large black insects were falling from the sky. Some were alive, others dead. They emitted an unbearable stench and poisoned the population. Apparently, this happened because Muslims lived there, and that salvation required them to convert to Christianity. In the rural areas of Greece, supposedly all men had died, leaving only a few women behind. And those who survived the first wave of the Great Death were said to be suffering en masse from hydrophobia, rabies, and dying as well. In Arcadia, a truly astonishing event was rumored. Men and women, all living creatures, had turned into marble statues. Even so, in the Florentine Signoria, these rumors were considered exaggerated, the kind of stories that circulate during any epidemic. The city continued its daily life. Churches held services, artisans worked, notaries kept records, merchants traded, though with a certain caution toward goods from the east, as was customary during outbreaks of pestilence. Throughout January, merchants brought reports of isolated cases of some unknown disease near Pisa. They claimed that people were dying within days or even hours, and local physicians did not know how to deal with it. No official reports came from Pisan authorities. There were no visible signs of an epidemic in the coastal city. Giovanni's fellow consuls took the reports of the deaths as nothing more than panic-driven rumors sparked by the outbreak to the west. However, unrest gradually began to grow among the inhabitants of Florence. Many were dissatisfied with the absence of anti-epidemic measures. At a meeting of the guild, merchants complained to Giovanni that craftsmen were refusing to go to work, and customers feared that the fabrics brought from the east might carry the disease. At the end of January 1348, Giovanni and the consuls of the guilds gathered in the Palazzo of Signoria, where a large council was held. Present were the 8 priori headed by the Gonfalonier of Justice, members of the Council of 12, the Council of 16, the councils of the guilds, numerous notaries, and a commission of appointed physicians, among whom was Giovanni's family friend and personal doctor Folco. To reassure the population and prevent an outbreak, a decision was made to inspect incoming goods and merchants for suspicious symptoms or putrid smells among the products. The priors from the Butchers Guild and the Tanners Guild were required to personally supervise the removal of industrial waste outside the city to avoid the accumulation of rotten refuse and stench in the streets, which were considered a direct cause of harmful vapors. Members of the Council of 16 were obliged to deliver to the Florentines an announcement from the Signoria, in which the appointed doctors urged citizens to keep their homes and apartments clean, warning that anyone dumping waste in the streets would be required to pay increased fines. The city committed to cleaning its paved squares and streets daily. Dirt roads in the outskirts were to be covered with straw and planks during the thaw. The increased guard presence at the gates reassured the residents. None protested, yet everyone held an inattention, awaited something. The local clergy fueled fear by preaching about God's punishment that had befallen the Muslims and Florence's rivals, the Genoese, and might soon strike the Florentines as well. Giovanni was a busy man and, always carrying a folder of documents, moved from the river docks to the warehouses, the guild residence and the signoria. He remained skeptical of rumors and the sermons of the clergy. Throughout February, Giovanni seemed to forget entirely about the epidemic to the west. On weekends, he and his family went outside the city to Pietro's villa, where they relaxed in the bathhouse, practiced archery and played in the snow. These pleasant activities were interrupted by the sudden arrival of a courier from the Signoria. In the city of Pisa, an unknown pestilence was raging. Dozens of people were dying every day with terrifying speed. Giovanni and Pietro went to the central square, where officials had gathered before the gates of the Signoria in great commotion. In the crowd, Giovanni spotted Dr. Folco. The doctor pulled Giovanni aside and told him he was corresponding with colleagues in Pisa. Pisan doctors had never seen such a disease before. People became infected and died within just a few days. Many doctors and nurses caring for the sick in hospitals were gravely ill or already dead. The best way to stay safe was to flee the city. Many nobles, craftsmen, and even physicians had already fled Pisa. At the meeting of the Signoria, it was decided to cut off river trade with Pisa and not allow strangers into Florence. After the council, Giovanni went home and ordered his wife, children, and some of the servants to pack their belongings and leave for the north to the estate of relatives in the countryside. Giovanni himself, as a conscientious official, would stay to continue his duties. The reports that had been arriving from Pisa for a week were bleak. It was said that up to 500 people were dying there every day. Streets were empty, and one could become infected merely by a sick person's glance. Yet, despite such news, life in Florence continued to flourish. The nobles who fled had little impact on the crowded streets. Shops, workshops, Taverns, bathhouses, pharmacies, and banks remained open. Churches were even more crowded than usual. In churches and on squares, people gathered for communal prayer to protect the city from the plague. 2 more weeks passed, and in early March, the city was shaken by the news of a man from the suburbs whose body became covered with large black swellings before he died. 2 women who had spoken to him at the market did not develop swellings but died of fever the next night. Their relatives and friends were suffering from similar fevers. 2 days later, news spread of 100 sick and several dozen dead. Giovanni arrived at another meeting of the Signoria. Of the 8 priori, 2 had fled the city. 4 members of the Council of 16 had escaped, and 3 from the Council of 12. The head of the Signoria raised the question of imposing financial penalties for abandoning one's duties. If the fugitives did not return within a week, others would be elected in their place. For a time, the townspeople stubbornly ignored the threat, but as soon as the sick began appearing on almost every street, panic set in. Many residents shut their shops, courtyards, windows, and doors, but many others continued their work, smithing, baking, cleaning, loading, harnessing, because they had no choice if they were to feed their children. On his way to the guild residence, Giovanni saw small crowds gathered near various houses. Relatives of the deceased coming to bid farewell to respected men, women, and children. Church bells tolled relentlessly from morning until night. In the temples, priests held funerals around the clock, after which long processions of clergy, monks, and relatives carried the dead to the cemetery. Poor craftsmen or servants would carry their loved ones, wrapped in white cloth, out of small courtyards, load them onto carts, and, accompanied by 1 or 2 monks, take them outside the city. The once crowded streets of Florence grew quieter. Only craftsmen bustled near their shops, doctors struggled desperately to help their patients, and anxious notaries rushed from house to house to record wills and transfer property of the deceased. At the meeting of the Signoria, it was decided to create a special commission of 8 men who would approve measures to prevent the spread of the disease. Lavish funeral processions and the ringing of bells were prohibited so as not to constantly remind the population of the daily death. A sum of 1,000 florins was allocated to organize services responsible for transporting bodies when relatives could not do so for various reasons. From the beginning of the epidemic, our protagonist attended the burials of 4 noble acquaintances. He accompanied their bodies from the stone houses to the cemetery, but he refused to attend the evening gatherings afterward. Giovanni observed how differently people behaved. Some chose to isolate themselves completely. They firmly shut their windows, shutters, and doors and did not leave their homes for weeks. Others accepted the catastrophe, abandoned all work, and simply entertained themselves. Through the empty streets, one could hear noise coming from taverns and certain estates where people drank, sang, and danced without thinking about tomorrow. Giovanni counted himself among a third group who acted with moderation. He followed the recommendations of Dr. Folco. He ordered his servants to light the fireplace with aromatic conifer wood, fumigate the rooms with herbs, wash the floors with vinegar, and maintain a diet rich in berries, citrus, and lean meat. Mostly he worked from home, corresponding with the guild through a courier. He only went to meetings of the Signoria, covering his face with a handkerchief so as not to inhale the harmful vapors. This cemetery was filling up quickly, so the Signoria regularly discussed allocating additional land for burials. For the first time in his life, Giovanni witnessed a strange phenomenon. Dozens of dead rats lay on the cobblestones. Each day, cleaners carried them away on carts. Yet every morning new carcasses appeared on the streets. On a street where Giovanni lived, not a soul was walking. Town cries from the sanitary services urged residents to bring out their dead. From the neighboring house where the large family of the merchant Zanetti lived, carriers brought out 6 bodies, loaded them onto a cart and took them away. 2 monks and 2 weeping servants followed behind the cart. There were hundreds of such desolate homes throughout Florence. From the abandoned courtyards, dogs, cats, chickens, goats, and pigs ran out into the streets, wandering aimlessly and digging in the mud. Giovanni had not spoken to his friends for a month, and even managing affairs through couriers were becoming impossible as many messengers were dying and replacements could not be found. Giovanni's housekeeper, Alessandra, insisted that her entire family outside the city had fallen ill and likely already died, but she feared going home lest she die as well. At the next meeting of the Signoria, the majority of its members did not appear. Of the 8 priori, 4 had died. Of the Council of 12, 11 were dead. Of the Council of 16, 7 had perished. Yet the work continued as usual. Officials from neighboring cities sent dispatches reporting that in Pisa, Siena and Pistoia, half the population had died. The municipal government of Pistoia had completely ceased functioning, as nearly all its members had perished. Giovanni's friend, Priori Pietro Appiano, had taken his family to live in a villa outside the city at the start of the epidemic. In June, he went to visit them and never returned. Giovanni was authorized to bring Priori Pietro to the Signoria, but the servants in the villa showed Giovanni 7 bodies lying in a row in the garden, covered with a sheet and giving off an unbearable stench. Along the road outside the city lay dozens of corpses, some already decomposing, others freshly dead. Large black swellings were visible on the neck of these bodies. The streets of Florence were almost completely deserted. The air was thick with the stench of death. Under the houses lay hundreds of bodies waiting to be taken away. Bleeding moans were heard from the windows. Here and there, besides red carcasses, lay the bodies of cats, dogs, and even pigs. Those who miraculously survived the illness hired themselves into the city services responsible for burials and cleaning, as these jobs paid well. Shopkeepers and bakers who had recovered reopened their stores, but they were dark and gloomy places. Each had lost a wife or children or parents or brothers and sisters. To overpower the stench and neutralize the harmful vapors, bonfires were lit in the streets, into which aromatic herbs and pine branches were thrown. The cemeteries were overflowing, so long, deep trenches were dug outside the city and hundreds of bodies were thrown into them. Almost all the notaries in the Palazzo della Signoria had died, so the priori and council members were now forced to record and transcribe the government's decisions themselves. Squares, churches, and gardens stood empty. Taverns, pharmacies, banks, and workshops were deserted. One morning, Giovanni awoke with a sharp pain under his arm. A large, painful swelling prevented him from fully lowering his arm. He called his housekeeper and ordered her to find Dr. Folco. She returned with the news that Dr. Folco had died of fever 2 weeks earlier. Florence and the neighboring cities would continue to be devastated by the great mortality for 6 months, and only at the end of September 1348 would life begin to return. According to medieval eyewitnesses, almost 90% of Florence's population perished. Modern scholars assert that this figure is exaggerated, that disease claimed more than a third of the population. Nonetheless, the mass flight of residents, isolation in homes, empty streets, and the constant removal of bodies undoubtedly created in contemporaries the shocking impression of the end of the world. In the year 1348, which I recall with bitterness, we lost not only friends but entire peoples across the world. Will our descendants believe that there was a time when almost the entire world, not just some particular corner of the earth, was emptied of its inhabitants, without fire in the sky or on ground, without wars and other visible disasters? When has anything like this been seen or spoken of? Has anyone even written about such events? Empty houses, abandoned cities, ruined estates, fields covered with corpses, the terrible and boundless loneliness that grips the whole world. Ask the historians, they are silent. Turn to the physicians, they are bewildered. Seek answers from the philosophers, they shrug, furrow their brows, and pressing their fingers to their lips, tell you to hold your tongue. O happy people of the future, they will not know these misfortunes, and will most likely consider our accounts a fable. Francis Petrarch.